Hello, hello to everybody watching, all three of you. um, I'm Matt, as I think most of the people watching, well, the people who are in chat anyway, have watched before, so you know who I am. But anybody who might be watching who's not familiar, I'm Matt. I'm the host of Three Skulls Tavern, this new channel. Um, I'm also one of the hosts on the Mud and Blood podcast, if you've heard of that. And basically, this channel is devoted to the Year Zero engine games by Free League. And that's why we're here right now with Tomas. I'm assuming people who are coming here to watch have heard the news recently that Free League have a new acquisition, which is what we're going to be talking to Tomas about. But yeah, just a very quick thing about this channel. As it's new, I'm going to be live streaming something every Thursday and Sunday night, 9 to 11 p.m. European time. And that's going to be things like actual plays, recaps of the games that we're playing, GM tips, interviews like the one today. I'm going to be doing some video games as inspiration for, possibly trying to do some video games as inspiration for some of the stuff I'm working on. And also maybe doing some game design, like designer diaries for some of my personal projects. But anyway, that's all by the by. That's the channel. What we're here for is to talk to Tomas, who is... What's your official title, Tomas? I'm never sure what to refer to you as.
I don't know. We're not big on titles, but I guess sometimes I say CEO, but I'm one of the co-founders of Free League Publishing, and I kind of try to keep the whole bunch in check and make things happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So the lead cat herder.
Yes.
Cool. And we're here to talk to you about Twilight 2000, 4th edition. Yeah, we've got lots of questions. So basically, why don't you, instead of me talking more, why don't you start telling us about, just share the little tidbit of the news that you gave, was it last week already? This week?
Yeah, God. It was last week, yeah.
Last week.
Yeah,
last week. Probably about a week ago, Thursday or Friday last week. Yeah. Yeah, over to you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the news, I guess, is that we're doing a 4th edition of Twilight 2000. We're kickstarting it in August. It's going to be released early next year. There's a lot more to say, of course. I mean, for me, this started with, the Twilight 2000 is a game that I played way back. I mean, the 1st edition, it's long ago now. I was a much younger person. So, the 1st and 2nd editions were like big things for me. I never played them quite as much as I actually wanted to. I did play them, but not that much. It was that game that I never played quite as much as I actually wanted to.
So we've all got one of those games, I think.
Yeah. So that's that, and it kind of stayed in the back of my mind for a very long time. And actually, we started playing. This is how this started for me. Is that we started playing a campaign in 1st edition Twilight 2000 maybe 3 years ago, just at the Free League people at the office, because this is one of the games that we all had a relation to for some reason. Mm-hmm. So we played that, and of course, being who we are, the question kind of came up that, okay, I wonder who's actually got that license. Is this a game we could do a new version of, or what's up with that? And we started looking around, and well, this is sort of the end result of that. So it all started with this campaign that we played of the 1st edition game a couple of years ago.
Okay. So you've been... It's fairly recent in terms of development time and that sort of thing, I guess, compared to some of your other games. Is that right?
Yes, I guess so. I mean, actually, we signed the agreement for Twilight 2000 before Alien. So it's actually predates Alien. It's only that Alien had a bit of we had to move really quickly on that one. Twilight has been a bit sort of simmering and going a bit more slowly, but it's been there in the background for quite some time now.
Okay.
By now now we're really sort of kicking development into high gear. We have, I guess, a 90% full draft of the game in terms of text, but of course testing is just starting, so there's plenty more to do.
Okay, interesting, because play testing is just starting. There's a lot of questions about mechanics. over in the Year Zero Worlds Discord server, I asked, we created a channel for this game, and when I yesterday I mentioned I was going to be interviewing you and I was asking for questions, and yeah, there's a lot of questions, and I remember Niels came on and was talking about the 2 dice system,
Right.
kind of mentioned it there, and that caused a huge furor. Like, whoa, what? Hold on, it's Year Zero engine, but it's 2 dice. How does that work? So I guess before we get into the nitty gritty. Can we throw at you the kind of the Forge's big 3 questions in terms of what's the game about, what do characters do in it, and what do the players do in it?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, no problem. So what's the game about? I mean, this is I mean, it's very much in the same vein as Forbidden Lands. I mean, actually, the Forbidden Lands was to quite some extent inspired by Twilight 2000. I mean, Forbidden Lands is kind of Twilight 2000 in a fantasy kind of version. So it's about survival. It's about exploration. It's about not only, I mean, the first step is survival, and the second one is what do we do now? It's about starting something new. It's about forging your own path in a world that's kind of gone to hell. So it's, I mean, thematically, I think it's very close to Year Zero and Forbidden Lands also, yeah, but it's the feel is a bit different. But I think the core themes are quite similar.
Okay. All right. And what?
Second one, what do characters do? Was that the one?
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, characters in this game, and this is something, I mean, Fallout 2000 has a military tradition. I mean, a lot of course, military personnel play it. It's got a military feel to it, and we're not taking that away, but we do want to expand the feel a little bit so you can play civilians also. You can play a mixed group. You can play soldiers if you want to, but you're a group of survivors, basically, no matter if you're in uniform or not. I mean, all kinds of organized armies have fallen apart anyway, so it doesn't really matter anymore what army you belong to before, because now you're on your own, which is the tagline basically of the original game and of this one as well. You're no longer part of any organized command structure. You have to find your own path now, and that's really what you do in the game. And that's what you do starting out. Then, as I mentioned, there are more things to do on more sort of long-term scale, apart from just surviving from day to day. I mean, that's hard enough. Then there's also the question of, okay, so where do we go now? If you're from somewhere else, if your character is from somewhere else, they might want to go home, which is a big part of the original campaign. But you might also be from there, or you might be from overseas, but decide that let's stay here and create something new where we are. So that's entirely possible also. And there will be base building mechanics kind of similar to Forbidden Lands, not exactly, but along those lines in Twilight 2000 also. And then finally, we have something called Operation Reset. This might be familiar to players of First Edition, because there was something called Operation Reset in the Free City of Krakow adventure module from way back when. We're taking that concept and kind of running with it and turning it into something a little bit different. But Operation Reset will be a theme, or that kind of runs through the game long term. I can't really go into what Operation Reset actually is, because that would be a huge spoiler. So that's something you might discover.
And I'd assume
by playing the game for quite some time.
Is that also something that's already been written? You mentioned like 90% of the text is written. Is that also?
Yeah, I mean, the ideas, the core concepts behind it are largely written. Actually, Operation Reset and the details of it are pretty much among the 10% not written. So, but yeah, we do. I mean, it's coming together right now. I mean, more specifically, what Operation Reset will be.
And are you, when you're playtesting now, are you playtesting through Operation Reset as well? I'm assuming like
that. For now, the playtesting that's going on at the moment and that's starting up now, it's mostly on just getting everything. Core mechanics, travel rules, combat rules, all that stuff more than the long-term campaign stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'm just looking at my list. Ed, do you have any questions you want to ask? So save me asking, like just talking.
My brain was kind of like going through loads of things. I was like, okay.
I mean, I really want to ask about the dice mechanic, but we'll get there, I think. Go on, Ed. Go on.
Just for this, kind of brought my original version, which is very well used and
I see that.
Yeah, it had a lot of love. One of the things that I really liked about obviously the second edition was the character generation. I think we've had a couple of questions about that as well. Is it going to be something similar to the way the original one worked, where you went through various different terms, or at least you progressed through your life?
Well, probably, and this is something we've done in some other games as well. There will probably be two ways of creating your character. One is like the fast way, which is similar to other games as well, where you can do it in a fairly fast. You can create a character in minutes, basically, and you don't have to spend a lot of time with it if you don't want to. But then we're right now planning a life path system where you, through random rolls or optional choices, can create your character kind of year by year, or that in that fashion. This is a bit similar to what we did for Forbidden Lands as well. There is an optional way to create characters using these kinds of random tables. So exactly that, this part is also not done yet. So I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like, but that's probably going to be more clear once we get closer to the Kickstarter.
Yeah. So one of the things I really liked about the original was that you could start going to war at any particular point. So you kind of had an idea of where your character was going to go. So I'll go this, I'll do that. Then you made an unfortunate roll. Before you knew it, you just come out of university and you'd started the game, which I personally quite enjoyed, because you kind of didn't know quite where you were going to go. Is that something you'd think about doing, or have you?
Yeah, we're looking at that. I can't say it'll be exactly like that, but we're definitely looking at those concepts and how to do them in a way that works with everything else in the game.
Cool.
I mean, this is a kind of a core thing that core principle when developing the rules for the new version, is that basically we want to look closely at the earlier editions. For me, it's first edition, but primarily, but also second edition to some extent, and to kind of capture the feel of the rules, the kind of, not the rules exactly as they were, but the feel you got from them. Because my experience from playing first edition now, just like a few years ago, is that I think the rules are well built. They work well. They're well made, but they do get, for my taste, a bit too clunky and a bit cumbersome to use. What we want to do is kind of the feel of the rules and the kind of general philosophy of the rules, but kind of create a system that does that in a way that is a bit more streamlined and doesn't quite take up as much time or headspace that can slow the game down when actually playing it. And that goes for character creation as well.
Yeah, I guess in the 80s and 90s, we liked having clunky rules.
I guess so. It was a trend at the time, for sure. I mean, I played Phoenix Command. I mean, that's kind of where the end of the road.
Oh, Phoenix Command,
yeah. I love that, but I wouldn't recommend it today to anyone.
No.
Ed and I were talking about this a little bit before, and saying that in the 80s, I think probably everyone was trying to find their feet, and you didn't necessarily notice the crunch so much because it was like the new thing, the new flavor of role playing game. Whereas now we've got 30 years of games being developed that we can all kind of tap into, and best practices to share and everything. So kind of things get a lot more slick and streamlined. But cool. Speaking of crunch, that was a big question on the Discord server, was how crunchy is this going to be in comparison to the other Year Zero engine games?
Right. I mean, I can say pretty much hands down, it's going to be the crunchiest Year Zero game that you've ever seen.
Okay.
But it will not be Phoenix. It will not be Phoenix Command. So I mean, somewhere in there, in between. Yeah.
That's probably gonna make some people very happy and some people not very happy, but that's cool.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So that brings me nicely to the real big question that I've been wanting to ask from the beginning, that a lot of people want to know about, which is, can you please go into a little bit of detail about this this 2 dice system that you're playtesting. I appreciate there's a big caveat here, which is you may not end up sticking with it. That's one of the things you're playtesting, which is kind of Neil's hinted at. But
right.
What can you share about it? A lot of us are intrigued about it.
Right. I mean, it's actually, I mean, the idea of doing it or something like it has been around for a while. And it's, I mean, personally, I think dice pools are fine. I like them. I think they have a lot of benefits. They scale in a nice way. They keep the arithmetic down. They're kind of easy to use. But of course, they have the obvious benefit of rolling lots of dice on the table, and they might get messy. And there is always that. So, just as an experiment, we've been considering how could you achieve something similar without rolling quite as many dice? Can we do this with fewer dice? And how would that work? So I mean, the version that we're looking at now, I mean, the core thing is fairly simple, and it's like you said, we might not end up using it. So, but it's what we're looking at right now, and basically instead of the analogy is basically what you had for the artifact dice in Forbidden Lands, is that you, instead of rolling more d6s, you roll polyhedral dice with higher chance of success. I mean, that's basically it. Exactly.
These bad boys.
So basically, instead of scaling your skills from 1 to 5 d6s, you'll scale your skills and attributes from a d6 to a d12.
Okay.
So it's that's very, I mean, that's in its core what it is. So basically, you roll 2 dice, 1 for your skill and 1 for your attributes.
Okay.
And depending on your level, that determines what type of
how
die
many so you're still looking at the same like sort of thing with you need at least 1 success.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you need and you'll need the way it looks at the moment, you'll need to roll a 6+ to get a success, no matter what die you actually roll. So obviously that chance increases if you roll a d8 or d10 or even a d12. And if you roll 10 or more, it counts as a double success. So if you're skilled, you have a high attribute score, skill level, you might roll up to 4 successes. So it scales in a bit of a different way than the normal Year Zero engine, but it achieves the same thing, kind of. Okay. So we're now tweaking this a lot, just looking at the probabilities and making sure that it gives you the results that we want, and the kind of the probabilities are where they should be, and this is what we're testing at the moment. But that's really in short how it works.
So, sorry, I'm going to ask you lots of pointy questions about how that works.
Yeah, you did.
I guess the first thing that pops into my head is how do you handle modifications to a roll, like negative modifiers, for example? Is that like a skill die gets degraded a step, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's at the moment the way it works. You simply degrade level up or level down your particular skill die.
Okay.
So that's basically it, yeah. Okay. And if you go above a d12, you get a bonus die. You can actually have a 3rd die in there. Okay. We also have a concept for this game that's specific for Twilight 2000 is ammo dice. So the more ammo, it ties into the rate of fire for weapons. And each rate of fire gives you the possibility to add ammo dice, and those are d6s. So that's actually going to be a dice pool anyway, but that's limited to the ammo dice, and you'll have nice little ammo dice with some kind of nice graphics on them. But that's kind of how we represent rate of fire. So in this version that we're testing at the moment. Okay,
and how is there going to be some sort of push mechanic?
Yeah, the push mechanic stays. I don't think we're going to change that. That would be. I mean, that's, for me, it's core to the Year Zero engine, and I really like it. I mean, it's I do not want to remove that. And it gives that kind of a fairly simple but still working risk-reward function that I think is, it adds to tension, and it gives every die roll a bit more impact. So we're not planning on removing that.
Okay. And last question before I let Ed ask his gear porn question. He's itching to ask. Will you be going down to D4 in this, or will it start at D6?
Currently, it starts at D6.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So as you might have, there are actually 4 levels, not 5. So that changes things a bit as well. So at the moment we're using a letter you know, grades in the US, I guess, from an A to D and then an F if you have no score at all in the particular skill.
Okay.
Right.
And I guess for a D4 wouldn't work with getting a 6 on the dice anyway, would it?
No, it wouldn't. So we'd have to change a lot of things if we do that. So no.
Yeah, no.
At the moment, we're not. That's not in the rules.
Interesting. Okay.
I just saw that on the chat. Ibrahim's asked, "What's the cost to push? Is it the same sort of thing? So you damage your stat?"
Yeah, I mean, this is something we have considered a lot, going back and forth. At the moment, you only have two types of dice. You have one from your attribute and one from your skill. I mean, in some Year Zero games, you also have dice from gear. We're looking at gear now and how to implement that. So I'll have to get back to you on exactly how that will work. But that's pushing will probably. I mean, the way it works in the current draft that we're working with, you will degrade your attribute when pushing. So kind of similar to the way it works in Forbidden Lands and Year Zero. The rate at which your attribute is reduced is lower in Twilight 2000, and that's because we want to. I mean, in a game where you play like mutants in the far future, you can accept some more funky stuff happening.
Yeah.
And if you play something that's closer to us and people who are closer to actual people, we kind of reduce those effects that are fine in Mutant Year Zero or Forbidden Lands, and they're a bit more toned down in Twilight 2000 to create. I mean, I don't want to use the word realism, really, because that's
more.
But it has at least a sense of being more grounded and a bit more realistic, I guess. So that's why we're toning some of those effects down compared to the other games.
Okay. A couple of other questions coming up relating to this. Speaking about kind of damage, staying on that topic a little bit. Any ideas with conditions? Things like being thirsty, being hungry, it being sort of like a big survival thing. I know Ed has talked about you could die from thirst in the original or something you were saying.
Yeah.
Yep. That's really key. And like I mentioned, I think that Twilight 2000 was a big inspiration for primarily Forbidden Lands, but also Mutant Year Zero to some extent, because it's I mean, and then you have these kinds of conditions, and they work not exactly the same as in those games, but along the same lines. You definitely have that. The whole resource management bit where you need to. I mean, the big difference from Forbidden Lands is obviously that in Twilight 2000 you have vehicles, so fuel, vehicle maintenance, all of that is key. Vehicle armor when you go into vehicle combat is really important. I mean, whether you attack a tank from behind, from the front, needs to matter in this game. In Mutant Year Zero, it doesn't work on that level, so it doesn't really it doesn't factor in. In Twilight, it needs to matter. These things. So that's why it's. I mean, that's the level of difference that we're looking at.
It's bringing up memories.
that was definitely one of our questions as well, was about vehicles, and so that's gonna make some other people happy too.
Right.
There's been another question in chat from Old School Empire who asks about the attributes. Are they going to be the same sort of 4 Year Zero engine attributes, possibly renamed, or are they going to be more?
In the current draft, there are 4, and they are pretty much the same as you would see in other Year Zero games.
Okay.
This might change, but in the current draft, those are the ones we're using.
Okay, cool. All right, Ed, all yours. All yours.
So obviously, one of the things that I really enjoyed when I originally played 20,000 was the artwork from obviously a lot of guns, a lot of vehicles. Are you going to keep the same sort of thing, or are you going to be more a few tables? How would that work in the book?
Well, when it comes to art, it's a key thing. I mean, we're working with primarily one artist mainly. He's doing the interior art. His name is Nicholas Brandt, and I think you've seen some. It's kind of a line art style, and the inspiration there that we kind of looked at a lot is again, first edition art of Steve Venters, that kind of pencil style art in the first edition. That was like this is what we wanted to kind of capture. So I mean, it has that feel. Another source of inspiration was actually when I was in the military service 25 years ago. we had like a field manual for the Swedish army,
Yes,
and it
yeah.
had like art in it that was hand drawn and colored. And it looks, if you look at that and compare to the art that we're doing now, there are definitely similarities.
That's cool. That is pretty cool.
I mean, that kind of field manual style art. So that's where we want to go for most of the art. We're adding some of the like the cover art and maybe some other larger art pieces that are a bit more moody and have a different feel to them. But most of the art is going to have that field manual style. And he's also doing, Niklas is doing vehicle art and weapons art. We'll probably show some more weapons art down the line. For some reason, we didn't want to lead with that when we presented that thing. I mean, I think it has its place, definitely, and there will definitely be weapons art in the game. But for us, Twilight 2000 is not just about guns, so we wanted to kind of not lead with the gun art.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's definitely there, and it will definitely be in the game.
So very similar to sort of like I guess the second edition when they brought out like a separate book which had everything in.
Right. I mean, there will be. We probably should show some pretty soon, because the cool thing about Niklas, he's very particular and he does his research. So it's very, it's true to form, and he's doing his homework for the vehicle art and the weapons art, which I think is really important for this type of game.
Cool.
Right. So one of the other things was in regards to equipment, I guess, kind of is like the consumables. I remember in the first one was obviously having to track absolutely everything, all your bullets, all your water, just everything, your fuel, you name it. Are you going to be going along the same lines as Forbidden Lands? It's going to be a representation.
Currently, this is one of the things that we want to do a little bit differently, and for the same reasons that I mentioned before. I think in games like Alien and Forbidden Lands, we track consumables with die rolls, so basically you're never quite sure. And I think that works well in those games. And in a game like Alien, that your air could run out at any time, you're not quite sure. It creates tension, and it works because that game is more cinematic. But I think in Twilight 2000, that might get frustrating because you want to have a little bit more level of control of how much water or fuel you actually have. And if it just runs out on the result of a die roll, that can annoy people. So we're not. It's more like in Year Zero. Actually, you track consumables in a more, I'd say, traditional way, and I think that's what we're leaning at for Twilight 2000 as well.
That makes me very happy.
That's cool. Yeah. And there's a question also come up in chat about tools, and it's about basically it says what tools and mechanics will set guns, for example, apart, other than like a +1. And that's something I'm kind of interested in. My favorite Year Zero engine game is Coriolis, and for a lot of reasons. But one of the things I really like about it is the additional stats on the equipment, especially the weapons, where you have like the crit rating and stuff like that. Is there going to be something similar, like a little bit more granularity, a little bit more crunch around gear, especially guns in Twilight?
Yes, I think so. I mean. That's particularly that you mentioned the crit ratings. That's something in the current draft. Again, all of this is subject to change, so I don't want to, I want to keep that. But yes, in the current draft, actually, it works similarly to Coriolis in that sense that you can get a crit before the opponent is broken. So there's a crit rating. So that which makes sense in this game. I think it's a bit more again. A little more crunchy, a bit more maybe realistic, if you want to use that word, or at least get that sense of realism. So yes, and that also gives us a few more like knobs to turn and create a little bit more granularity and difference between pieces of gear and weapons. Okay. So yeah, and then right now we're actually looking at some more options to do that, because in this game it needs to matter. You need to get like the sense that every piece of gear that you choose will feel and be different than something else that you might pick up. So a gun is not just a gun. It matters if it's that particular type or that one. That needs to matter in this game. So yes, again, it might not be as granular as like the early editions, but there will be enough granularity there to set these types of weapons and these particular different guns apart.
Okay, cool. Right, we got another question in chat, which is another good one. So there's a lot of I've got questions prepared, and there's a lot of good ones coming up from people who are
All right.
watching live. So this is from Ibram. He's asking about whether there are plans to have a quick start included during the Kickstarter campaign.
Good question. This is something we're considering right now. I think we probably should. So if we can get that done, we will. I think it would be a good thing. I mean, just something fairly short. So, but to give people a chance to try it out during the Kickstarter itself would be a good idea. So if we can, we will.
Cool. Awesome. All right.
I just saw Old School Import asked, how deadly is the game? Do players need to create 3 character pool before starting?
Yeah. Well, maybe if you use the life path tables, that can probably happen too. But in general, it will be a deadly game. I don't think. I mean, if you played other Year Zero games, you probably know that they are generally pretty deadly, and this is definitely no exception. Probably among the deadlier of the bunch.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's dip into the setting a little bit. Now, I've got no experience with this game whatsoever. I only know what I've read from your blurb, and I've heard people talking about Twilight 2000 in the past. So I know that the original is based in the year 2000. World War III's happened, and because it was written in the 80s, it's obviously it all doesn't make any sense now. It's 20 years in the past. I'm assuming from your newsletter and the announcements that were made that you're keeping to that like alternate history, kind of pitching it as an alternate history now. But there's been a lot of questions coming up from people asking who are familiar with the original, asking things like, is it still predominantly going to be tying to things like NATO forces combined with local civilian type of people on the ground? Is the Warsaw Pact still kind of an important consideration in the setting, that sort of thing? Are you kind of sticking back to that original vision of this alternate history now, or are you diverging a little bit and putting your own stamp on it?
I mean, I guess it's a bit of both. I mean, first of all, yes, we are keeping the game in the year 2000, which obviously now makes it alternate history, not near future, which changes things a bit.
Yeah.
There's a number of reasons for why we did that and didn't place it in 2030 or something. And primarily, the main reason is that near future settings tend to age really quickly.
Yeah.
They kind of feel out of date in the year and they just feel stupid. So we didn't want to go that way. And also, it's also a way of focusing the game on the key themes of survival and rebuilding and finding a way, as opposed to getting stuck in some kind of trying to predict the future or commenting on current politics or something like that. So by going alternate history, we kind of veered away from that, and it made it easier to focus on the key themes of the game. Plus, we get the added bonus of retaining a kind of a Cold War old school feel, which we also think feels
it's great.
Like part of the brand, part of the game.
Yeah.
So that's probably why we did that, and it is not the same like backstory, the same world exactly as was presented in the original versions, neither not from first edition or second or 2.2 or I mean, it's not exactly that, but the end result is pretty much around that. I mean, the alternate history that we wrote for this version, it diverges around the Moscow coup in 1991. When the KGB and the generals tried to take power. Obviously, in real life, that failed, and that was kind of the end of the Soviet Union for all intents and purposes. But in this version, the coup succeeded, and the collapse of the Soviet Union was halted, and it kind of recovered in the years after that, and then things fired up until the year 2000. So the end result, the kind of world you have, is similar to what you would have in the early editions, but the specifics of the timeline are quite different.
Okay.
There are some strange things, I think, in the first edition that I think Italy joins the Warsaw Pact or something. I don't remember. But there are some. We're not doing that. We're kind of presenting a timeline, an alternate timeline that we think makes sense. But yes, in terms of who you play and who you are, it's fairly similar. You will still have NATO soldiers, US soldiers on European ground, getting stuck, stranded here. Then you can play those, but you can also play local troops. You can even play Soviet troops who will also be there. And you can play civilians or a mix of them all. This is kind of what we want to emphasize, that you don't have to play soldiers, you can play civilians or a mix of them. Because at this point in time, it doesn't really matter what unit you belong to. It's a matter of finding a group to survive and move forward. And you might bring on civilians that you meet along the way, or it will be more of a mixed group. But in that sense, I think it's fairly close to what you would see in first edition. That's one of the things I liked about first edition Twilight 2000, is that it's fairly agnostic in terms of, yes, you're supposed to be playing US soldiers, I guess, but the rules really give you all kinds of options, even then in that old game, to play civilians or Polish troops or Czech troops or whatever. It had quite an open field of who you could actually create as a player character. And we're definitely sticking with that.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because, again, Ebron's asked this question, but it ties in really well with options there. You mentioned that there was going to be a kind of Swedish setting involved with it. And I think I remember reading somewhere, maybe hearing from Niels, that there was also going to be options to play in like your own, like anywhere you wanted. Can you talk a little bit around that? Like, I'm assuming that Poland is still the primary setting for what we're going to see in the book, but how much are you devoting to other places? Like, is Sweden going to have its own write-up, and that will be the only other specific setting, and then there'll be general guidelines for doing your own thing, or like what's your thinking around that?
Yeah,
obviously, it's all subject to change, of course.
It is, but yes, so this is, I think, this part is fairly, solid at this point. I mean, we wanted to go back to Poland in like the year 2000 as the core setting, because it's fairly iconic. It goes back to the early editions, and we want to bring that back. So that's there, but we also wanted to expand the game a bit and make it truly sandbox and modular in a way that I think first edition was not really. It was a sandbox game, but then you still had to go to Krakow and then, travel down the Vistula and go to Warsaw. So it kind of had the potential for sandbox, but then the expansions kind of forced you down a particular path.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is to embrace the sandbox in a more sort of full way. And the way to do that is that we present Poland as one setting, and then to kind of show an example of how you could play the game in a different setting, we also include Sweden as an alternate setting. So we have two possible settings included in the game, and they're meant as primarily, I would say, as examples for how you could also create your own setting to play wherever you want. Because if you present two settings, it kind of shows the ways this can be done. This is a bit similar to what we did in Tales from the Loop.
Yeah.
Swedish setting and a US setting, and then also, but please do go ahead and play in your own hometown or wherever you want to set the game.
So similarly with
similar to that.
Having like two different sets of names for NPCs
so,
and locations and two different.
We have a format here called scenario sites. It's similar to adventure sites in Forbidden Lands. And for local NPCs, they will probably have two sets of names. There will be the Polish names and probably Swedish names, and then you could kind of, if you want to adapt it to somewhere else, you can do that. There can be some scenario sites that are very specific to a particular country, but we want to try to keep things fairly modular so that people can get the tools they need to set the game wherever they want.
Okay. So also creating your own scenario sites, also potentially using the Free League workshop to create and sell them too? Okay, cool.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, there might be some scenario sites that are definitely need to be at a particular place or at least a particular country, so we'll have that too. But some of them might work well to be fairly general, and you could use pretty much anywhere. So we wanted, that's kind of what we want to do with this game, is to give it a more of a modular sandbox approach where you can really kind of grab all these tools and play where we want. But then you have Poland as well, and that write-up Poland as if you want to go, that's the default. So then you can just go ahead and do that.
So your game is only starting playtesting, but I'm interested in the expansions already. Are you thinking about following a similar model with Forbidden Lands, with having a campaign as a linked set of scenario sites, and then possibly doing additional scenario sites packaged together as campaigns in future, similar to what's happening with Bitter Reach and the other expansions, or do you have something else kind of in mind for how you like how you can approach expansions?
Yeah, I mean,
Online?
I think actually it's a bit different. What we're planning so far, we want to follow the model of the kind of classic first edition expansions, where you had the Free City of Krakow, Paris of Vistula, and then Ruins of Warsaw, and then you had the Blackwood Online going home. But like the first three, the thing I liked about that is how they also each introduced like a new theme, not only like the particular place, but also a theme. The first one was about cities, the second one was about boats and rivers, and the third one was like large scale battles. So what we want to do is basically create. The first we have planned is not going to be Free City of Krakow, but it's going to be a cities expansion, how to play in cities and give tools for cities and playing in them. They will also include Krakow and probably some Swedish town as examples of that. But we'll try to expand the scope. And probably the next expansion after that is going to be not Pirates of the Vistula, but it's going to be about probably like rivers, seas, lakes, and boats, basically, and expand that whole field of playing in a more maritime environment. So it's going to be that. And then the next one is probably going to be large-scale battles. That's what we're looking at. So it's and so we want to stay with the themes, but maybe with a little less focus on the particular geographical locations, but still staying along those same themes that they had in the first edition. And as well, we'll have we have something called Operation Reset, which is a kind of a that we're which will be a meta plot, I guess, some kind of something that's going on in the background that you can. I mean, it's in the original Free City of Krakow module. There's something called Operation Reset. We're kind of playing with that concept a little bit and turning it into something a little bit different, and expanding the scope of it. So that's going to be something that you can expand and explore throughout the campaign, and probably include more and more information about that in these expansions. So I would say, comparing to Forbidden Lands, it's not going to be as specific, limited campaigns as Raven's Purge and Bitter Reach. We're more looking at painting a broader picture. It's going to be even more of a sandbox game, where you don't even have like the Operation Reset is like the overarching meta plot, I would say, and there might be others down the line, but at the moment we're kind of looking to expand the game with more scenario sites, more themes, and expanding this Operation Reset plot through for quite some time.
Okay. So
that's kind of how it looks at the moment.
So tapping into the modular elements of it and the sandboxy element of it, Steph Ouch, who's actually here in chat as well, asked about how hex crawling is going to be treated, whether it's going to be similar to what we've seen currently with Mutant Year Zero and Forbidden Lands, whether there's going to potentially be some elements of wargaming that we might see creeping in due to the nature of the genre, that sort of thing. Have you put a lot of what are your kind of current thoughts on how the hex crawling is going to be handled?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think another inspiration beyond obviously Twilight 2000 itself are like kind of old school war games. So where you get that kind of hex and counter type of gaming. And in this game, this is a difference from other Year Zero games, I guess, that you have the travel maps, the big maps. They will be fairly similar to Forbidden Lands, which also uses hexes. The obvious change for Twilight is that you have vehicles and roads, which changes things a bit. But the system for travel is fairly similar to Forbidden Lands, but a lot about vehicles. That's like the main difference. But then another change is that in Twilight 2000, we use hexes also for combat maps. So combat will use a hex system and counter. So combat will have more of a war game feel to it than any other game that we have made. So and that also changes some of the mechanics, and it gives different feel to it. And it's been done. I mean, I actually it's another game from the same era that I used to own and play, but that I would not want to do a remake of. It was called Price of Freedom. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'd seen it when I was trying to figure out what other games were around at the time. Yeah,
I mean, I don't think we should revisit that one particularly, but it did do combat in hexes, but hexes like a war game, and that we're actually doing something similar to that for Twilight 2000. And if we can, depending on, it might be a stretch goal or something, is that we'll actually have modular combat maps, so you can create terrain by placing like combat maps together in different ways to create an immediate environment to quickly create a scene and get your counters in and start a combat, because they will be more map based than other Year Zero games, which are primarily theater of the mind, even though you can use maps. Here the maps will be more key also in combat, because you want to get that feel of more tactical feel of combat than perhaps in some of the other Year Zero.
I can foresee a rousing trade in Free League Workshop stuff.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, I mean, that's great. I mean, and I think this game will be very open to that, because it's really a toolbox. So I mean, hopefully that will that people will enjoy making stuff. I mean, people are already doing a lot of things for Twilight 2000. I mean, the early editions, there's stuff out there being made, and hopefully we can really contribute to that and get people involved and create stuff for the game, because that's I think this game will really lend itself well to that.
It kind of sounds like with a kind of nods to wargaming that there's how to put this, it sounds like it's possible that there's going to be a very high attrition rate with characters, right? That there's going to be a lot of character death. Like you're going to have some sort of skirmish and you're going to have 3 tanks are going to roll up, and you've got one broken down Jeep or something, and before you know it, boom boom boom, you're mostly dead. So you've mentioned that you're thinking about having some sort of like headquarter or base mechanic. I'm assuming that's going to tie into kind of creating new characters or converting NPCs into new PCs. Is that something, because we've never really seen any advice on creating new PCs in the existing Year Zero games. It's often just left to however the table wants to do it. But I can see in this game it might be something where it might be a little bit more of a feature or more important than in the other games. So is that something that you're also kind of looking into?
Yeah, we're looking into it. I mean, we're talking about things like troop play to get.
Cool.
Maybe have a larger pool of characters to draw from, and that, of course, like you mentioned, ties into a base mechanic as well. So yeah, we're looking into it. I'd be honest and say we're not quite done on that front yet, but it's one of the areas we're looking into. That's
quite exciting because Paul Bodowski, do you know who Paul Bodowski is?
Yeah, I know.
He's just done a blog post yesterday or today about troop play in Symbaroum, and it was really good, really good read. And I was thinking about why do you not see more of this in role-playing games, like even written to the role-playing games, or just advice about how to do it, because it's an intriguing concept. And I can see that if you've got a base, you have like a group who are going out, like the military unit, like the alpha team are going to go out and like investigate something. But then you've got like this like the not even the beta team, but like the omega team, like the really shitty ones, they just learned how to fire a rifle, and they're like, no, you need to go find some water, or something like that, and doing the shitty jobs. And you can have that troop play kind of playing in, and then you're kind of playing a little bit, like you can intersperse sessions with different groups. I think that's I would be really excited. I mean, not that I'm going to try and direct where you're going with this or anything. I've had flack for this in previous interviews before, but anyway, I think troop play is a really cool concept that we don't see enough of in role-playing games. So just you saying that is kind of, especially with the recent blog post by Paul, is quite exciting.
Especially when it's a game that's going to be, I guess, fairly lethal. You don't want to kind of create a character and then suddenly, oh wait, I've got to start another one.
And that's a traditional role-playing way of doing things, right? You've got the one character and you're investing every single session in that one character, and when it dies, like if that character dies, then it can be quite a dramatic thing. But yeah, if it happens relatively frequently, it might be nice to have a rotating roster that you every now and again, let's play the Omega squad or whatever. Ibram asks a question about which is kind of interesting. We're talking about combat a little bit there. It sounds like there's going to be a bit more crunch around that with maps and kind of battle maps and things like that. Are there still going to be options for zone combat like we've seen in the other Year-Zero games, like the more theater of the mind sort of style? Is that still going to be supported?
You can do that, yes. I mean, it's certainly. I mean, for small, specific, if you play like smaller combats or smaller conflicts between just a few individuals, you probably won't need a big battle map. So yes,
Okay.
you can definitely do that. But the game rules as such, at least in the current version, it uses hexes for combat, not zones. So you kind of have to choose one or the other. And at the moment, it's
Okay.
hexes. Some small conflicts that can take place maybe within the same one hex, it won't be a thing. So then it'll pretty much be a theater of the mind anyway.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Cool.
Questions?
Yeah, I'm pretty much through with my list of questions on from Year-Zero Worlds. I'm not sure if anybody on chat, because we're getting close to the 1 hour mark here. If anybody else has any questions in chat, go ahead and start throwing them out, because we've got about got Tomas here for a short period still. I'm kind of curious about who else is working on it. I know Niels is picking up a lot of. It's been talked about Niels kind of picking up some of the development. Anyone else that's worked on previous titles that we might know of?
Right. I mean, yeah, that's a good thing that you mentioned it. I mean, I think that the lead co-writer for Twilight 2000 is a guy called Chris Lights. I'm not sure you're familiar with him. He's done
I
work
recognize the name. Yeah.
with Modifius and others. He's a very experienced game writer and editor, and he's doing a lot of the setting stuff,
Cool.
scenario sites. He's writing up. Yeah, I mean, so he and I are like, I guess, the main writers for the game so far. In terms of internally from other titles, I mentioned Nicholas Brandt, the artist. He did some work for Forbidden Lands, so you might have seen his work there. And of course, the cover art is by Martin Reed, who does Symbaroum and Alien.
Yeah.
And then, which I think is really cool and important in this game, is that we have quite a few now active or retired military personnel, primarily from the US so far, that are kind of consultants on the team. Some of them we've had on for months already, just to check that things make sense. I mean, I did the military service 25 years ago, but I'm not up to date. So I mean, getting these guys in to just check things and make sure it makes sense, just both from a sort of terminology standpoint and also rules, is really important. And after the announcement last week, I think we had 2 or 3 people, contact me that just sound like also we're kind of adding to this roster of military personnel who can kind of lend their expertise to the game as well. So that's really cool, and I think it kind of carries on the legacy of the game, and I think it's important to get that part right. So I'm really happy about that.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool.
There's a further question from Old School Empire. Will players have the possibility of controlling squads of NPCs?
Sorry, didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, so will the players have the possibility of controlling squads of NPCs?
Of NPCs? Well, possibly. I mean, in the current rules that it's looking now, like standard type play, that's not part of it yet. But like we discussed earlier with troop play, there's definitely a possibility of adding elements like that, and even more so when we get to which might be the third expansion for large scale battles. We'll definitely see something along those lines. Okay. But the core gameplay, it's not part of the core gameplay that we're looking at and testing at the moment, but it's definitely something that can come along down the line.
Okay. What about things like I don't know much about the setting, but I'm assuming it's aiming more for realism, where we're not going to be seeing mutant monsters or things like that. Is that the case, or are we going to see some sort of more fantastic elements? Like what's?
It's a very good question. I mean, so far, and I mean, Twilight 2000 has stayed. I mean, it's a near future, or was a near future game that kind of focused on realism and the simulationism. I think you need to be a bit careful there, but I mean, the one thing that we're already doing is, we're already moving into, this version will be alternate history.
Yeah.
It will not be near future. So it's already, in a sense, just by doing that, we kind of move the game into the realm of the fantastical, if you want, because we're talking about an alternate history now, not something we think will happen in the future. And I think that is a bit of a change. Just doing that changes it a little bit, and I think that might be a good thing. But I mean, we're not planning on doing crazy mutants coming in. That's not what we're planning to do.
Well, you already have Mutant Year Zero for that.
Yeah,
right?
so we can do
Exactly. It's not going to turn into Mutant Year Zero. But I think there's just a tiny, opening of that window, and I think that's an interesting way to. I mean, it's just something we're discussing and thinking about, let's put it like this: if you want to play the game very straight, without any kind of fantastical elements, that's definitely going to be entirely possible. We're not changing that, but just by, like I mentioned, just by changing the game into alternate history, we have already kind of taken one step in that direction, I guess, whether we wanted to or not. But it's a tricky question to give a very straight answer. But if fans of the old game will not be ambushed by crazy mutants and works from the future or something. So
I mean, the real reason I'm asking is because I'm getting little hints of the Stalker video game series. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all. And I can see people using this as a method of playing a Stalker role-playing game. They would just need to reskin, like if there aren't any kind of anomalies or the kind of mutant animals and those sorts of things, it would be relatively. I mean, looking at some of the other stuff, that'd be relatively easy to do. So, it's just kind of why they came to my head with the animals. Is like if you had included that in the core rulebook, if you were already thinking that way, then you're almost creating a kind of something that's very easy to fork off into that realm. But I'm sure somebody enterprising is going to do it very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully. I mean, that's the cool thing, right? That we want to make this a toolbox so you can do all kinds of stuff with it. Like you mentioned, the stalker type environment is definitely very close to this, only adding the anomalies and the weird stuff. Yeah. I mean, another obvious thing is, I mean, to a large extent, Twilight 2000 that we're doing, it's a little bit like The Walking Dead without zombies. If you want to add the zombies in, that's entirely possible to turn it into a zombie apocalypse. That you'd have to do that on your own. We're not going to do that. Yeah. But it's entirely possible using this type of gameplay and these rules. So, and that's kind of this game more than all. I mean, I think all of our games, but this game in particular, is really, really a toolbox to use for the campaigns that you want to play.
I mean, there's so many different takes on a near apocalypse where it's shortly after the apocalyptic event, and there are bands of survivors, usually attached to somebody who's got weapons training or something like that, as they're trying to survive, whether that's zombies or something else. And whether that's zombies or I've heard of this like crossed graphic novel recently. There's just so many different takes on it that I think. Yeah, this kind of sounds like, I mean, it's post-apocalyptic, soon after the event, with a heavy focus on like gear, kind of, and that kind of works for anything, and survival. So cool. We've got a bunch of questions coming up.
So Astonetta asked, could you give an example of a typical adventure, gathering resources, defending against militia? So if it's anything like I remember it being, there was a lot of going out to find stuff. Or I've noticed in the chat, someone's talking about the Abrams tank or whatever. It's great you have all this gear, but it never worked, or you had to get someone to fix it, or you needed to get the right fuel. And so I remember a lot of the players that I had spending a lot of their time going to raid the nearest farm or wherever it might be to get the alcohol so they could fuel their trucks. They could actually get a couple of miles down the road. And I'm guessing that's something similar that would be happening in this.
It is, and I mean, the format that we'll be using mainly, it probably won't be like your typical scenario from A to B. It's more of an open world. So it'll be driven by, you'll have the travel rules and the random encounters. I mean, there's that in the there's a random encounter system in the first edition that, I mean, it has that sandbox thing. We're taking that and probably extending it a bit further. So, and you'll have a system of random encounters. You'll have rumors that you can encounter, kind of like legends in Forbidden Lands.
Yep.
Also radio transmissions. There's going to be random charts for you can pick up radio transmissions as you go along. And all of this stuff is going to create like pulls. You can pulling the player groups into different directions on the map where they can go. And this will kind of create a campaign that kind of rolls very organically where you want to go with the kind of questions that you're discussing and finding resources and maybe hearing a rumor about some place where they're really well defended and have a lot of resources. Maybe we should go there, right? But there's a big, like, maybe enemy troops nearby, and you kind of have to find your way and find your own path. And then there are these overarching to get some kind of long-term goals as well. You have that's where you have the either you can have the going home thing that can be a thing, or you have Operation Reset, or maybe something else that kind of drives your goals long term. So it's more going to be it's very much a campaign game. I guess you could play a one-shot scenario as well, but I think the core way it's built, it's much more of a campaign sandbox form type game.
Well, I've really got the whole campaign running around in my head already.
Right.
So you just hurry up and produce the book.
This is the thing I haven't really mentioned yet for people listening. Ed has run a Twilight 2000 campaign in the 90s for like 2 years, you said, and Ed's also very familiar with the Year Zero games. He's a big fan, so. He offered to run it, and I was like, well, why don't we run it on this channel? So Ed is going to be, subject to like time scales and everything else. We're hoping for Ed to be able to start running a campaign here on the channel once a month, and hopefully we'll have at least one proper session under our belts by the time the Kickstarter goes live.
Right.
Yeah, to give a kind of like an actual broadcast of how it works. So. Yeah, that's gonna be kind of exciting. I'm glad Ed, you're already coming up with some ideas for a campaign.
What did I have myself in for?
Yeah,
that's great.
I want to ask. There was a question that came up that's quite good. We've kind of skipped past it a little bit, but it was about talking about the vehicles a little bit and asking about are there kind of. The implication was, is it going to go into 3 dimensions? Like, are helicopters going to be kind of a thing? And there's going to be rules for how that works. You're nodding, so okay, cool.
Well, yes. I mean, like in the old editions, helicopters will be very rare because it's going to be a difficult thing to find that kind of fuel to actually, and just to keep a helicopter running, it requires a lot of resources, which would be rare in this game, but they do exist. You might run into one, but I think vehicle combat is going to be a thing, primarily a ground thing. I think aerial vehicles will be rare in general, but definitely, and that's something we looked a lot at and tried a number of different versions, is to kind of capture. What I liked about the first edition vehicle combat rules is that you can kind of see, you hit from a particular angle. Matters which angle you hit, and then you have the different components that you can kind of damage one by one depending on the attack angle and so on. I wanted to keep some of that, but making it a bit less clunky, because honestly it takes a lot of time to do that, and it's fun once, and then like the third time, so it just so we were trying to find a way to capture the feel of that, but in a more kind of a condensed way. So so yes, it will be there. But exactly how, I guess we'll get back to and when people get a chance to try that for themselves. But so that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Awesome. One last question then. This is we touched on it a little bit, but asking about attributes and skills again. I'm assuming for the playtesting you've already mentioned that you're currently working with the four typical type of Year Zero engine attributes.
Yes.
What are you looking at with skills currently? Obviously, subject to change, all the rest of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, the skill list will be very much adapted to the game, but the kind of number of skills, the kind of scope of the skills that's something we been thinking about how to do. I mean, the original version had a lot of skills and quite granular. We still, at the moment, keep the number of skills fairly low, and we create specializations using talent instead. So that's kind of how we've been doing it for our other games.
Okay.
At the moment, that's how it works in Twilight as well. The difference is that the actual skills themselves, what they are for, is adapted to this
Sure.
game, of course.
Sure. Like any of your games, yeah.
Yeah. So it's exactly. So I think the closest where it comes to skills, just looking at the list, how they kind of work, is Alien, I guess.
Okay.
And then we kind of try to capture like even particular names of skills from like the old editions are brought back, but maybe this time around they're talents instead of skills, just to kind of give the same feel, but they're handled a bit differently.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Ah, cool. All right.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, me too. I was just thinking about skills. I think all of your games, but one, have specific skills tied to like an even number tied to their attributes, and like Coriolis is 8 general and 8 advanced attributes, which don't map perfectly to 4 each to the attributes. Is that? Oh well, just wait. That's fine. I think that's enough. That's enough of a teaser for one day. You're still fine tweaking everything. So I guess the answer, Stefalch, is that there's going to be attributes and skills, and currently looks like there's going to be talents like we'd expect to see from any of the other Year Zero games, which is cool.
At the moment, yes.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. There's another comment that came up talking about the when you were talking about the different types of combat and how it's primarily going to be ground based and stuff. That there are good board games for handling ground combat, and it strikes me that Free League is branching out into board games recently. So yeah, who knows? Who knows? Martin's gonna need to be busy after Tales from Loop is finished, right? Cool. Yeah, Old School Empire. It is August. I imagine you don't have a specific time in August. End of August, probably.
No,
right?
we haven't set the date yet for a number of reasons. We just need to make things. There are a number of uncertainties with these things, so we'll announce the dates a little bit later.
Okay, so it's gonna be but August is what you're running for the start of the Kickstarter. Yeah.
Yes.
So okay, so running probably into September.
Probably running into September.
Okay. Cool.
Well, guess I'll be putting my money in then.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's it for we haven't got any more questions kind of really cropping up in chat, and I know you probably want to get away. I did see on Twitter that you've got another interview lined up for your 2 a.m. So
yeah, yeah, that's right.
You got to keep the North Americans happy, right? So all good. I'll let you take a nap or whatever you need to be able to fresh and ready for those other interviews. But thanks for coming and talking, Tomas. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you too. So talk to you later.
Yeah.
Cheers.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks everyone for watching. And yeah, if you're like what you've seen, there's gonna be more content like this in the future. Hit the follow button in Twitch, and you'll get email alerts when we go live, basically. So thank you very much for watching and asking all the cool questions in chats. And we'll catch you next time. I'm gonna be live this coming Sunday. Don't know what I'm doing yet, but I'm gonna be going live. So we'll see. All right. Thanks again, Tomas. Thanks Ed for stopping by as well.
That's right.
All right.
Thank
and
you.
cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.